Hey guys. Okay, so I got actually a lot of questions, which I thought was kind of cool. Um, there was one question, personal question, so I guess I'll answer that. Um, I'm just gonna list a few because it's kind of personal questions, and it's like I don't know, kind of like I could stalk you questions. Someone asked me what colleges I'm gonna apply to. I have a list of 10 right now, and I'm not allowed to leave the Midwest. So I'm looking at things in the general area like DePaul, Marquette, Dayton, Butler, St. Louis, stuff like that. I'm just gonna leave that at that. There's like a ton of other ones, but I prefer not to be stalked. Gonna throw that out there. Um, okay, so now questions about writing. I got a bunch, so there's gonna be multiple videos because some take a long time to explain. Okay, so one question. I'm not gonna say who asked the questions. You can find that out if you really want. Anyway, what kind of writing characteristics should I use? Should it be filled with more romance, fantasy, suspense, etc.? Okay, when it comes to stuff like that, it's really preference, but you have to follow through on it. For instance, I write pure romance, so I wrote romance and drama. If I one time had an idea for when like Cupid kind of leading her to Zach Porter, I know I posted a chapter of that, which is what I'm telling you, and I might write that one, but so don't take my idea, dude. Um, but it's okay to do like fantasy or whatever. Totally cool, but follow through on it. So if you start a fantasy novel, fantasy should be a huge component of it. Don't just have it kind of this small thing. It needs to be a big component. I know one girl is pretty much writing a fantasy novel, an A-up fantasy novel, which is fine, but her whole thing is revolved around it, which is totally cool, and it's fine. But you have to stick with your guns, is what I like to say. If you write a fantasy novel, you write a fantasy novel. If you're gonna write a romance novel, you write romance. So, but of course, it can be both. So it can be a romance novel and a fantasy novel. But if it is, the whole thing has to be in that way. You shouldn't just be like romance, romance, romance. Oh, he's a vampire, by the way. Romance, romance, romance with some vampire crap. No, no, no. If it's going to be a fantasy or supernatural or suspense, it should be that way the whole way through. I've been told my story that I'm posting now, Just One Mistake, I wrote it a while ago and I never posted it on here, has a lot of suspense. But the suspense stays throughout the whole thing. So the only thing is you can do whatever you want, but you gotta keep it consistent. And if you tend to read more of one type of book, I suggest you write that. Why do I write fanfic novels, romance fanfic novels? Is because I read romance novels. If you look at my books, they're all romance novels. At least most of them are, because that's what I like to read. Um, have I ever been on a date? Ever been in a relationship? No. But why can I write it? Because I read so much of it, I can figure it out. So, for instance, if you don't read fantasy novels, I don't suggest you write a fantasy one because it's not going to turn out right. Because you don't. Because every kind of story has a basic formula to it. You know what I'm saying? Um, there's basic formulas and you subconsciously follow them. I mean, breaking the formula is fine, but there's still a basicness of it. For instance, a romance novel, I remember there's this one story I read, the whole thing was just like cutesy stuff. And that's fine and dandy, but that's not a story. That is just a bunch of cute chapters where everything was perfect, nothing really bad happened, and if it did, I was solved in like 2 minutes. That's not a story. That is a bunch of cutesy chapters. And it was really good. Like, it was an awesome, like, chapters of cutesiness, but it wasn't a story. There was no plot. Stories work where there's a climax, there's build up, climax, um, and something fixes, and then you kind of go back. And for instance, Quietly as Fault has multiple climaxes, but there's a climax, there's a point. It's not all blue skies. Um, and I'm not going to call the author out because it's a really good story, and she started posting it on Amoeba anyway. But it's fine, but it's not a story. Nothing happened. I can't tell you, oh, the main point of the story is this. Well, if you look at the first half of Quietly as Fault, you can say I can't tell you the plot of that one story. If you look at the first half of Quietly as Fault, I can tell you the plot. The plot is her kind of getting friends, and then Zach leaving her, and her dealing, and each person dealing with it. So climax of the story was him leaving. Okay? And then the solution came and he came back. The climax of this next chunk was her mom came. You know what I'm saying? So, stuff like that. So that's what you have to make sure to do. Because you can write whatever the hell you want, but you gotta stick with your guns and you gotta make sure you follow the right formula. The point is if you don't read fantasy novels, don't go write me a fantasy story fanfic, because it won't turn out right, because you don't really know what you're supposed to do. Because every single fantasy novel, every single suspense novel, every single adventure has a basic format. If you notice, almost every single adventure movie you have has some form of romance. It's not necessarily the main plot. Like if you watch The Dark Knight, I mean, romance is so clearly in there, but does it control the whole novel? Or, not novel, the whole movie? No. But stick with your guns. Don't go flaking all over the place. When you write a story, you should have up to chapter 20 or so planned in your head. So that way, when you write it, you accidentally, you subconsciously start dropping hints at everything. You know what I'm saying? For instance, in Quietly, from the second I started that novel, or story, that's not a novel, sorry. The second I started that story, I knew her mom was going to come back. I knew who she was. I knew Zach was going to leave her. I knew her mom was going to come back. So if you noticed, I started her mom leaving her in, like, the very first chapter, the first or second chapter. You knew she didn't have a mom. She just left. So when her mom came back, you knew from the beginning. It's not like, oh, by the way, she doesn't have a mother, and that's relevant. No. From the beginning, it was all interluded in everything. So you kind of have to do that. So when you write, you can do whatever you want, but plan ahead. I'm not saying write it down, but in your head, have the general plots. I'm not telling you in your head to have every story chapter written, but that and stick with your guns. So the question was, because I just kind of got off, but the question was, what writing characteristics should I use? Should I be filled with more romance, fantasy, suspense? It's whatever you want. It's what you can write. I can write romance, so mine's all romance, because that's what I do. I mean, I don't read many fantasy novels because I'm picky. Like, I enjoy fantasy novels, but I'm very picky on the fantasy novels I read. Like, I am freaking in love with The Hunger Games. But I read Dragon Rider. Oh my goodness, I shouldn't have read that book. I hated it. If you like it, that's cool. I'm not dissing you, but it didn't fit my personality. So you just kind of have to decide what you want to do, and what characteristic has to be up to what you know, because you write what you know. Do I know romance? I don't know the legit stuff. I've never been on a date. I've been kissed because of a dare, and that's it. So no, I've never experienced it, but I know it. I've read so many romance novels. It's ridiculous. So, write what you know. So, I can't tell you whether to write a suspense novel or a fantasy novel, but I can tell you, if you don't read suspense, don't write a suspense novel. And so that's that question. There's going to be like 4 other videos, because when I explain something, I want to really thoroughly explain it to you, which is why I don't like commenting answers to these questions. So this is one of maybe like 3 or 4. Anyway, so peace. Another video in like 2 minutes. Bye, guys.